So the first thing I want to tell you this week, I've got some amazing news about a TV show. So keep watching until the end and don't skip, don't cheat. But this week I'm going to show you how I fitted my first door, but then I fitted another two because they all had different issues. So one of them was not square on the door frame, so I'll show you how I tackled that. And the other one, the door was too long for where I needed it to, so I had to trim a bit off and fill the inside with a wooden insert. So I thought this would be a really useful project to show if you want to save money and try and do it yourself. I highly recommend it because I think it's a skill everybody should tackle. And it was quite fun chiseling hinges, or is that just me? Anyway, keep on watching if you want to see how I get on and for the news. So before I got started, I needed to work out the measurements of my door frame. So I made a note of the width and the height. But I was quite nervous about buying the right size doors. And that's because everywhere I looked for the cheapest doors, it said you could only trim off a certain amount off the bottom. So my next step was to put the doors in their right rooms so it could acclimatise and just settle. What I didn't want to do is fit the doors now and then they might warp later, meaning I'll have to adjust them again. And while doing research, loads of places recommended 3 to 5 days. And I also found there's a lock side and a hinge side. So during all fittings, I kept checking the lock side at the top just in case I messed things up. These are the cheapest and lightest doors that I could find at 13 kilograms. So don't be fooled for 1 second that I'm Wonder Woman. So I was quite happy with the original door fitting. It's also a good idea to check the frame with a spirit level to see if it's definitely square. But the bottom of the door had been cut on an angle and I couldn't understand why, because the height of the door frame was exactly the same from left to right. So instead I ignored that one and went for the longest length. I didn't want to cut off too much and then have to buy a new door. So I moved that one out of the way and placed my new one on top. Again, making sure the lock side was on the same side. So when it came to cutting the door, I didn't want to chip any of the bottom, so I covered the top with some masking tape and then made a pencil marking on it of where I wanted to cut it. And I used a long spirit level to get a straight line. But I also asked my dad what type of saw I should be using, and he recommended the one with the finest teeth. And I just took my time, a bit of arm ache, plus I think it's good for bingo wings. And then I sanded the bottom edges because I didn't want to catch it on the carpet. So as soon as I cut it, I placed it straight in the door, and luckily I didn't have to do much trimming on the side. Not bad. But this was the easiest door to fit. But I needed to prop it up. So using some off-cut skirting boards, I decided to make some homemade wedges. And now I'm comparing the width measurements of the old door onto the new one. But luckily I only had a mil or two to reduce. If it was any more than 2, then I'd try and equal it on both sides. And then with those width pencil markings, I extended that line from top to bottom, again using a long spirit level. And once I'd clamped the door to the sawhorses, I used an electric plane just to take off a mil or 2. And then sanded the edges again. So now I've got it to the size I want. I've placed some 2p coins along the top, propped the door on top of the wedges and pushed the door upwards to minimise that gap and push the wedges in as much as I could as well. So now I've got it where I want it, it was time to mark out where the hinges used to be. And using a speed square, I drew straight lines of where I'd marked them, and then held the hinge in position and drew along the bottom. So at this point I couldn't find my Stanley knife, but I'll get to show that later, but instead I had to use a very sharp kitchen knife and score on those pencil lines. And then it was time to practice some chiselling. So I will leave video links below of what I'd used as references, but a massive thanks to fellow YouTuber Ollie Parry Jones for kindly sending me this handmade wooden mallet. It was absolutely perfect for the job, so thanks so much because I used it a lot on all 3 doors. And I just tap away gently on the pencil lines, and then once I'd done that, I'd done about 5 mil intervals. And no, my chisel shouldn't look like this. You'll probably want to use something sharper than mine, but sharpening tools is another thing that I need to learn. So I'd go along to the bottom and scrape away until the hinges were flush, but I decided to reuse the old hinges here, so this one was quite straightforward. But I also found if you are fitting new hinges and it no longer closes by the time you've installed it, then you might want to chisel more for the hinges rather than trimming down the side of the door. And now to pre-drill the hinge holes, because I didn't want to just screw into it and split the wood, and then screw straight in. So now I've got the hinges on my doors, it was time to fit it to my door frame. So I'm holding it into position I've actually got a wedge underneath the door here, and then I'd screw the hinge to the door frame. But some of the other doors I had to do it the other way around, depending on whether I had good access or not. Yeah, I like that, I like it. So now to think about the lock, and obviously you need to make sure the lock side is facing the right way. So I marked halfway between the catch with a pencil and drew a straight line with my speed square to the opposite side, and then find the halfway point to drill a hole. But this is where I hadn't got enough confidence to use a bigger flat wood drill bit. So regrettably, I followed a Silverline Craig Phillips method to use a 13mm drill bit, but I'll show you my favourite method later. So you can see I've got masking tape on it, so I can only drill so far, and then drew around the latch and then started chiselling that bit out. And although it was good for practicing chiselling, this was far too time consuming, and I don't think it's good for someone starting out. I'm not doing this again, it's boring. So my latch is now in, and I'm scouring around it because I need to chisel a bit more so it can sit in it. I marked with a bradawl of where I needed the screw holes to go and pre-drilled my holes. And this is where I needed a countersink bit, and I didn't have one. Again, I'll show you that later. And I gently used my smallest chisel for the back of the faceplate of where the screw holes would sit, and made another straight line of where that pencil mark was, held the latch against it, and drew a mark through the spindle hole. And now I'm using the 13mm flat wood drill bit again to create that hole. But later my dad said it's better to go for a 15, just to make sure you've got plenty of room. And so many tutorials said be careful that you don't chip wood on the other side, but came up with no solution on how to change that. And I'll show you how to prevent that on my next door. So the latch went back in, then screwed it in and placed the spindle in, and it was finally time to screw the handles on. So I used a small spirit level for this, pre-drilled some holes and screwed them on. Let's try it. Then onto my next door, and I knew this wouldn't be as easy because this was a door frame that wasn't square by quite a bit. So to fix that, I propped the door up, but I had 1 2p trapped on the far right and as many 2p's as I could fit into the left gap. Now I'm sure there's a better method than this, but what I did was take 1 2p away and then measured the remaining 2p's together, then marked that on the top right hand side. So once I transferred those measurements to the door and then planed and sanded the excess off, but scored around the hinges with a Stanley knife instead. Because I'd learned I didn't like the first method that I tried for the latch, I knew that all latches were different. So what I did was just use a scrap piece of wood and I'd drill a hole through it. This is a 22mm one, by the way, and I found I needed a 25. So now I'm confident it's going to work. I carried on and drilled my hole. Yay! Definitely my favourite way. But now for the spindle, went for a slightly bigger one, a 15mm flat wood drill bit. But this time, because I didn't want to rip the other side, I clamped some old pallet wood to it. So when I drilled my spindle hole, it had no chance of doing that. So I'm happy I can say I've learnt my favourite method. Oh, miles better! Now for my last door, I wanted to show you how I cut down more off than I was meant to, according to the instructions, because I wanted to reuse this bottom bit. So I'm cutting the ends off to get a right length, then chiselled off the cover of it, and then pushed back any of the cardboard inside the bottom of the door. I did find out how to plane it a little bit for the perfect fit. Someone also recommended just to go over it on the inside with sandpaper just to key it so the glue would adhere better. So thank you so much for that. And now it was time to glue it, and I added it to all of the sides. I placed it in until it was flush, and then using some scrap of cardboard and 2 long pieces of wood, I clamped it all together to create a sandwich to evenly distribute the weight for a sturdier finish. And I was going to use panel pins for this. Some people recommended cocktail sticks, but because I didn't need to use the door straight away, I didn't need to do any of that. But what I didn't get on film is that I screwed one of the sides so I could pull it slightly to make sure it was definitely flush. And then it was ready to plane more if I needed to and sand the edges. So if you think you're not capable of doing this, have a think about it, because I did this all on my own, but they are the lightest internal doors. So I'm hoping that has encouraged anyone just to give it a go. It's not a quick job, like I say, but it was fun to do. and I would definitely do it again, because the more I do it, the more I should get better, hopefully. But if you do anything differently, feel free to comment below. Hopefully it will help me on my techniques and other people. But for the exciting news, February just gone, in fact it was Valentine's Day, I had the BBC round and they came to film me do a whole project, which was my patio step leading up to my conservatory on breeze blocks and then slabs. And I was quite nervous, but I got into it and then filmed the whole thing. And I've just found out that it's going to be tomorrow, 2nd of July, on the BBC One at 9:15. And it's on a TV show called Right on the Money. So I'm hoping it will inspire so many other people to give things a go. And yeah, well, that's what this is all about. And I keep learning and falling off my sawhorse. Anyway, if you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And hopefully I'll see you in my next one. And hopefully you enjoy the show. Thanks for watching. Bye.